tell you something that I've kept to myself for almost 4 years now. I've started writing it out a handful of times in a notebook, once in the Notes app on my phone at 3 in the morning, but I always stop. I always get to a certain point and my hands start doing this thing where they shake just slightly, not enough that someone watching would notice, but enough that I can feel the letters going wrong under my fingers. And I close the notebook or I lock the phone and I put it away and I tell myself, I'll do it later. I'll get to it eventually. There's no rush. And that's true in a way because nothing is chasing me. Nothing is urgent. Whatever happened to me in those mountains, it happened and it ended and I drove away and I'm alive and I'm fine. I'm fine. I keep saying that because I need it to be true. And most of the time it is true. And the rest of the time it's close enough. But I'm going to do it now. Tonight. All of it. Start to finish. Because I realized something recently that scared me more than any of the things I'm about to describe. I realized I'm starting to forget. Not the big things. The big things are welded into me. But the small things, the textures, the exact order of events, the specific quality of certain sounds, those are going soft around the edges. And I think if I don't pin them down, now they're going to dissolve into something I can manage, something I can live with, and that's not the same as what actually happened. And I think what actually happened matters. I think someone needs to know. So here it is. The whole thing. In the spring of 2022, I was in the worst financial shape of my life. I want to be specific about this because it matters. It matters that I took the job for the reasons I did. I was 31 years old. I had a bachelor's degree in communications that had never once been relevant to any job I'd held. I'd been working at a fulfillment center outside of Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is a polite way of saying I put things in boxes for 11 hours a day in a building with no windows. The pay was $15 an hour, which sounds like a number you can live on until you actually try to live on it. I had a studio apartment with a window that faced a brick wall. I had a car with 217,000 miles on it. I had credit card debt that I tried not to look at directly the way you try not to look at the sun. And then in March, the fulfillment center cut shifts, not a layoff, technically. They just reduced everyone to 3 days a week and said it was temporary, which is a word that companies use when they mean permanent but don't want to deal with the conversation. 3 days a week at $15 an hour minus taxes is not enough to cover rent and a car payment and insurance and food and the minimum payments on the credit cards that you used to cover the gap the last time something like this happened. I did the math on a receipt in the parking lot of a Food Lion, and the math told me I had about 6 weeks before everything collapsed. Not metaphorically, literally. I would not be able to pay rent. I would not be able to make the car payment. The card companies would start calling, and then they would stop calling and start sending letters with words like collections and legal action, and then I would be in a hole so deep that climbing out would become the kind of project that takes years. So I applied to everything. I mean, everything. Night security, seasonal farm labor, a medical study that paid $800 to let them monitor your sleep for 2 weeks. I applied to be a parking lot attendant at a ski resort 3 hours away. I applied to jobs I wasn't qualified for. I applied to jobs I was overqualified for. I applied to jobs I didn't fully understand the descriptions of. I cast the widest possible net, and I waited for anything to bite. The listing for the fire lookout position was on a Virginia State Jobs Board, buried in a section I almost didn't scroll to. It was categorized under seasonal/temporary natural resource positions, and the posting was brief. The Virginia Department of Forestry, it's in cooperation with the George Washington and Jefferson National Forests, was seeking a seasonal fire lookout for a remote posting in the Allegheny Mountain region of Western Virginia. The position ran from late April through mid-August. Compensation was listed as a modest bi-weekly stipend, plus housing. That last part is what caught me. Housing included, which meant no rent, which meant I could theoretically sublet my studio apartment, defer, or reduce my car payment by parking the car at my brother's place, and come out of the summer with enough saved to reset. It wasn't a plan so much as a controlled crash, but it was better than the uncontrolled crash I was heading for. I applied. The application was short. Name, contact information, a brief questionnaire about physical fitness and comfort with remote environments. One question asked, "Are you comfortable spending extended periods alone with minimal human contact?" I checked yes. Another asked, "Do you have any experience with backcountry or wilderness settings?" I checked yes for this too, which was generous of me. I'd gone camping twice in college and once got lost on a day hike in Shenandoah for about 4 hours, which I suppose technically counts as backcountry experience in the same way that falling into a pool counts as swimming. I got a call 3 days later. The woman on the phone was named Janet. She had the kind of voice that suggested she'd been doing this job for a long time and had stopped finding it interesting, which was somehow reassuring. She told me the posting was at a place called Maddox Station, a fire lookout tower on a high ridge in the western part of the National Forest. She said the tower was accessible only by a Forest Service road, which itself branched off a county road about 40 minutes from the nearest town. She said I'd be alone for the duration, except for a supply drop every 10 days and occasional radio contact with the district ranger station. She said the job was straightforward. Watch for smoke, maintain the equipment, take weather observations, report anything unusual. Unusual how? I asked. Weather, she said. Fire behavior, anything out of the ordinary? I said I'd take it. She told me to report to the Deerfield Ranger Station on April 26th at 8 in the morning. Someone would drive me up to the tower and get me oriented. I spent the next 2 weeks getting my life into a state that could survive without me for 4 months. I sublet the apartment to a co-worker's cousin. I parked my car at my brother's house in Staunton. I packed a duffel bag with clothes, books, a deck of cards, a journal, and a battery-powered alarm clock that I'd owned since college. My brother drove me to the ranger station on the morning of the 26th. He told me I was nuts. I told him I was broke, which is a different thing, but equally motivating. The ranger station was a low brown building in a clearing at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. The mountains were not dramatic. That's the first thing I want you to understand about the Appalachians, because I think people who haven't been there imagine something grand and sharp like the Rockies. And the Appalachians are not that. They're old. They're the oldest mountains on the continent, and they look it. They're worn down, rounded, covered in trees so thick and uniform it looks like green fur. They roll and fold and overlap like something sleeping under a heavy blanket, and the hollows between the ridges are deep and dark, and the fog fills them like milk in a bowl. And there is a quality to the light in that part of Virginia, a softness, a heaviness that makes everything feel like it's happening underwater. The mountains don't loom, they settle, they press. They are not tall enough to inspire awe, but they are old enough to inspire something else, something I didn't have a word for then and still don't, really. A feeling of being inside something, enclosed, held, watched maybe, though I wouldn't have used that word on the morning I arrived because I didn't know yet what it meant to feel watched. Not really. The man who drove me up was named Dale. He was probably 60, lean and weathered, with a Department of Forestry cap and a manner that suggested he communicated primarily through silences of varying length and intensity. He drove a green government pickup truck up a Forest Service road that climbed and climbed, the pavement giving way to gravel and the gravel giving way to dirt and rock, the trees pressing in on both sides until their branches met overhead, and we were driving through a tunnel of new green leaves. The road switchbacked up a ridge, steep enough that the truck leaned on the turns, and I grabbed the door handle more than once. We crossed a creek on a bridge that was really just 2 steel plates laid over the water. We passed through a section of forest that had burned at some point in the past, maybe years ago, maybe decades, and the dead trees stood in rows like gray teeth, stripped and skeletal, and between them, the new growth was coming in thick and tangled, mountain laurel and rhododendron, and the effect was of something ruined being slowly, patiently consumed. After about 45 minutes, the road leveled off and the trees thinned, and we came out onto a high, narrow ridge, and there was the tower. Maddox Station was a 60-foot timber frame fire lookout tower built, Dale told me, in 1953. It was a simple structure. 4 legs of heavy dark wood rising from concrete footings at the base, cross-braced with diagonal timbers, topped with a square cab about 14 by 14 feet with windows on all 4 sides. There was a staircase that zigzagged up the frame of the tower, 5 flights with small landings between them. At the base, there was a storage shed made of corrugated metal and an outhouse set back about 30 yards into the tree line. A narrow clearing surrounded the tower footprint, maybe 50 feet in every direction before the forest took over again. To the south and east and west, the ridge dropped away into forested valleys. To the north, the ridge continued, climbing gradually toward higher ground and thicker timber, the kind of forest that looked like it had never been logged, never been thinned, never been touched. Old growth, maybe, dense and dark and continuous. Dale helped me carry my supplies up the stairs. The staircase was steep and creaked with every step, the wood gray and soft with age. The cab at the top was spare. 1 cot along the east wall, a desk along the south wall with the radio equipment, a logbook, and a metal filing box, a propane stove on a small table, a chair, a fire finder in the center of the room, which is a flat metal disc engraved with a topographic map of the surrounding area, with a rotating sighting device on top that you use to take bearings on any smoke you spot. The windows were single-pane glass in wooden frames, and each one had a hinged wooden shutter on the inside that you could latch closed. Dale walked me through the basics: how to operate the firefinder, how to take weather readings with the instruments on the deck outside the door, how to use the radio, which was a boxy, olive-drab unit that looked like it predated me by a generation but worked reliably. He showed me the kerosene lantern and the backup flashlight and the first aid kit and the fire extinguisher. He pointed out the propane canisters and showed me how to hook up a fresh one when the current one ran out. He told me the supply truck would come up the road every 10 days with food and water and anything else I'd called in for. He told me to radio the district station every morning and evening for a check-in and any time I spotted smoke. Then he stood at the top of the stairs ready to leave, and he paused. He looked back at the cab like he'd forgotten something. He had this expression on his face. Not worry exactly. More like the effort of deciding whether to say something. Then he nodded toward the desk and said, "Fella before you left some notes. Might be worth reading through." I asked what kind of notes. Dale shrugged. "Station notes. Things to know about the posting. He was up here a couple seasons. I knew the place pretty well." A pause. "He didn't finish his last rotation, left about 3 weeks early." I asked why. Dale looked at me for a moment and then said, "Personal reasons. That's what he told us." Another pause, longer this time. "You'll be fine up here. Just stick to your routine. Don't let the quiet get under your skin." Then he went down the stairs and I listened to his boots on the treads getting fainter, and then the truck door, and then the engine, and then the sound of the truck heading back down the ridge, the gravel crunching and popping, and then nothing. Just the wind. Just the trees. Just the sound of a place that had been empty before I arrived, and would be empty after I left, and was in some essential way empty even now. But I stood in the center of the cab, and I turned slowly, and I looked out each window at the world spread out below me. Miles and miles of forest. Ridgeline after ridgeline receding into blue haze. The farthest ones indistinguishable from sky. Not a road visible, not a building, not a single sign of human presence in any direction. When the sun was bright and the sky was clear and it was beautiful and it was terrifying. And I didn't realize it was terrifying until later that evening when the sun went down and the dark came up out of the hollows like a tide, and I understood for the first time what it means to be truly alone. But that was later. Right then, in the bright afternoon, I was still in the practical, problem-solving part of my brain. I unpacked my bag. I made the cot with the sleeping bag and thin blanket I'd brought. I organized the food supplies. I familiarized myself with the radio. And then I sat down at the desk, and I looked at what the previous lookout had left behind. It was a single sheet of paper, laminated in clear plastic, taped to the surface of the desk. Not taped casually, taped deliberately, all 4 edges sealed down with packing tape that had been applied smoothly and firmly. Whoever had put this here did not want it to come off, did not want it to be moved or flipped over or lost. Wanted it right here on the desk, where the next person would sit and see it every day. The paper was printed in a plain, unremarkable font. At the top it read, in slightly larger type, "Station Notes. Maddox. No name. No date." Below that, a short paragraph. I don't know how to make these sound reasonable. They won't sound reasonable. I understand that. I sat where you're sitting right now, and I would not have believed this either. Follow them anyway. Follow all of them. Do not skip any. Do not modify any. Do not decide that one of them doesn't apply to you or doesn't make sense. I made that mistake, and I am writing this list because of what happened after. These are the things I wish someone had told me. Below that, numbered 1 through 7, were the rules. I'm going to tell you what they said. I've gone over them enough times in my memory that the wording is exact or very close to it. I can still see the typeface. I can still see the slight yellowing of the paper under the lamination. I can still see the small crease in the upper left corner where the sheet had been folded at some point before it was laminated. Rule 1. After sunset, here's the cab door stays closed and latched until sunrise. No exceptions. If you need to relieve yourself during the night, use the bucket under the cot. Do not go down the stairs in the dark for any reason. Rule 2. Every evening before dark, turn your radio to channel 4 and leave it on at low volume overnight. You will hear static. This is normal. If the static changes, if it goes silent, develops a pattern, or if you hear any clear sound through it, especially a voice, turn the radio off immediately and do not turn it back on until full daylight. Do not listen to what it says. Rule 3. You may hear sounds outside at night, footsteps below the tower, movement in the brush, knocking on the door or on the windows. Do not respond to any of these sounds. Do not go to the window to look. Do not call out. If you are in the cot, stay in the cot. If you are at the desk, stay at the desk. Continue whatever you are doing as if you did not hear anything. This is important. It is not enough to not respond. You must behave as if the sound is not occurring. Do not stop what you are doing. Do not tense up. Do not hold your breath. Act naturally. Rule 4. There is a tall dead tree standing alone approximately 150 yards northwest of the tower. You can see it clearly from the north-facing window. Check this tree once in the morning and once before sunset. If you see anything in or on the tree that was not there previously, any shape, figure, discoloration, or object, note the time in your logbook, close the north-facing shutter, and do not open it again until the next scheduled check. And under no circumstances should you use binoculars or any magnification device to look at this tree or anything in it. You may look with your unaided eyes during routine checks only. Do not study it. Do not stare. Glance, assess, and look away. Rule 5. Between the hours of 1 and 4 a.m., you may feel a strong urge to go outside. It will feel entirely natural. It may present as restlessness, as a need for fresh air, as simple curiosity. You may have a sudden desire to check on something, to look at the stars, to walk the perimeter of the clearing. These feelings are not yours. Stay in the cot. If you cannot stay in the cot, sit at the desk and keep your hands busy. Do not open the door. Rule 6. At no point during your posting should you speak your full name aloud. Not on the radio, not to yourself, not in conversation with supply drivers. Use your first name only if you must, but the post designation Maddox is preferable for all communication. Do not write your full name anywhere visible inside the cab. If you keep a personal journal, keep it in the filing box with the lid closed. Rule 7. If you see a light in the forest at night moving or stationary in any direction and at any distance, do not signal it. Do not flash your own light toward it. Do not radio the district station about it. Do not attempt to determine its source. It is not a hiker. It is not a search party. It is not another station. Close the shutters facing that direction and go to the cot. If the light appears to be approaching the tower, close all shutters and sit on the floor in the center of the room and with your back against the firefinder pedestal and wait for dawn. That was it. 7 rules. I read them twice, sitting in the chair at the desk, with the afternoon light coming warm and clean through the windows and the gentle sound of wind in the trees outside. And my first reaction, my honest, genuine first reaction, was mild amusement. I actually smiled. I thought, the last guy lost it up here. Spent too many nights alone in the dark and started hearing things and seeing things and built this whole mythology to make sense of it. And now he's left it behind like a campfire story for the next person, probably hoping I'd freak out and quit so he could feel validated. I'd read about isolation effects. sensory deprivation, pareidolia, which is the way the human brain fills silence with pattern and empty darkness with shape. I knew that people alone in remote places see and hear things that aren't there. It's not mental illness. It's just what brains do when they don't have enough input. They make things up. They confabulate. They turn the creak of old wood into footsteps and the call of a barred owl into a voice and a shadow on a dead tree into a figure. I was sure that's what had happened here. The previous lookout had experienced the normal psychological effects of extreme isolation and had, rather than recognizing them for what they were, constructed an elaborate framework of rules to manage his anxiety. I felt a little sorry for him, actually, and a little annoyed, because the laminated sheet was taped to the desk very securely, and I wasn't sure I could get it off without damaging the surface, so I was going to have to look at it every day for 4 months. But I also noticed something even then in that first amused reading. The tone of the rules was not dramatic. There was no flair, no storytelling. The language was flat and practical, the way you'd write instructions for operating a machine or performing a workplace procedure. Specifics, distances, times, Channel 4, 150 yards northwest, 1 to 4 a.m., first name only. These were not the vague atmospheric warnings of a horror story. They were the precise, measured notes of someone describing something they had observed, something with consistent behaviors and reliable patterns, something they had watched long enough to map. When there was a practicality to the rules that didn't fit with paranoid fantasy. A crazy person doesn't write, check the tree once in the morning and once before sunset. A crazy person writes, beware the tree. The specificity bothered me. I couldn't articulate why, not then, but it sat in the back of my mind like a splinter. I put it aside. I had work to do. I took my first set of weather readings. I figured out the firefinder. I did my evening radio check-in with the district station, a brief exchange with a dispatcher whose name I didn't catch. Maddox Station evening check, all clear. Copy, Maddox. Have a good night. That was it. That was the sum total of my human contact for the day. I cooked dinner on the propane stove, canned soup. I ate it sitting in the chair, looking out the south-facing window, watching the sun go down over the valleys. The sunset was extraordinary. The sky turned red and gold, and the light caught the underside of a long band of clouds and set them on fire, and the mountains went from green to black in slow gradation. The hollows filling with shadow, the ridge lines holding the last of the light, like the spines of something surfacing from deep water. I watched until it was gone, and then the dark came. I want to describe the dark because it's important. The darkness at Maddox Station was not like any darkness I'd experienced before. In the city, in a town, even in a rural area, there is always ambient light. Always some glow on the horizon, some reflection off a cloud, some distant evidence that other people exist and are awake and are keeping the dark at bay. At Maddox Station, there was none of that. When the sun went down and the sky dimmed and the last blue light faded from the west, the darkness was total. It was thick. It was physical. It pressed against the windows like something trying to get in. Inside the cab, the kerosene lantern made a small circle of yellow light that ended abruptly about 3 feet from the flame. And beyond that circle there was nothing. The windows became black rectangles. The forest below was invisible. The mountains, the valleys, the whole vast landscape that had been spread out below me all day, gone, erased, replaced by nothing, and the quiet. During the day, The forest made sounds. The birds, wind, the occasional rustle of something moving in the underbrush, normal sounds, alive sounds. At night, the quality of the sound changed. The birds stopped. The wind, if there was wind, moved through the canopy with a low, continuous sound like something breathing. And beneath that, in the gaps, there was a silence so deep, it had texture. You could feel it on your skin. You could feel it in your chest. It was the silence of a place that had been silent for a very long time, a place where silence was the natural state and sound was the intrusion. I sat in the chair and I read for a while, a paperback I'd brought, some thriller I don't remember the title of. The lantern hissed softly. The cab creaked in the wind. Outside, the darkness was absolute. I thought about the rules. I thought about Rule 1, about closing and latching the door. I'd done that already, not because of the rule, but because it was cold. April at this elevation, temperatures dropped into the 30s at night, and the door was closed and latched, and it would stay that way until morning, whether or not a laminated piece of paper told me to keep it so. I thought about Rule 2. I picked up the radio and turned it on, a hiss of static. I tuned it to channel 4 the way the rule said. More static. I left it on low and set it on the desk. I don't know why. Maybe the same reason I'd closed the door. It was something to do, and the static was a kind of company, a formless sound that filled the silence without adding meaning. I went to bed around 10. The cot was narrow and hard, and the sleeping bag was adequate but not generous, and I lay there in the dark after I'd turned off the lantern. And I stared at the ceiling I couldn't see, and I listened to the static on the radio and the wind in the trees, and I thought, this is fine. This is just a job, and this is just a place. I am a grown man lying in a bed in a room, and there is nothing out there except trees and animals and weather and the vast, indifferent machinery of the natural world. And I am going to be fine. I slept. That first night, I slept. The first several days settled into a routine that was almost pleasant. Wake at dawn, open the shutters, take weather readings on the deck, eat breakfast, morning radio check, scan the horizon for smoke, making a slow circle of the cab, spending a few minutes looking out each window with and without the binoculars. Log everything, read, eat lunch, afternoon scan, more reading or cards or just sitting and watching the forest, evening weather readings, evening radio check, dinner, lantern on, read until tired, lantern off, sleep. The weather was good those first days. Clear skies, mild days, cold nights. The forest below was in the full rush of spring, the canopy filling in, the understory blooming with dogwood and redbud, white and pink against the green. From the tower, the mountains looked soft and harmless and new. I could hear birds during the day, wood thrushes mostly, their liquid, spiraling calls echoing up from the hollows. Occasionally a hawk circled below me, riding the thermals that came up the south face of the ridge, and I'd watch it through the binoculars and feel something close to peace. I checked the dead tree. Rule 4 had specified it, 150 yards northwest, and I found it easily. It stood at the edge of the clearing on the north side, where the ridge began to climb toward the higher ground. It was enormous. An oak, I think, long dead, stripped of bark, and bleached almost white by weather and time. Its trunk was straight and thick, and its branches extended in every direction, bare and pale, like arms reaching. It stood alone. The nearest living trees were 30 or 40 feet back from it, as though the forest had retreated from it, or as though it had killed whatever once grew close. There was nothing in it. No shapes, no figures, no discolorations, just a dead tree. I glanced at it in the morning and before sunset, the way the rules said, and I saw nothing unusual, and after a few days I stopped thinking about it consciously. It became part of the scenery, background. The radio stayed on channel 4 at night. Static, just static. The same unchanging hiss like white noise, like the sound of nothing itself. And the nights were quiet. I lay in the cot, and I listened, and I heard the wind and the occasional creak of the tower, and sometimes, far away, the cry of an owl or the bark of a fox, and these sounds were identifiable and normal, and I filed them away and I slept. Not perfectly, not the way I slept at home, but adequately. The darkness still pressed, and the silence still had its weight, but I was adjusting, I was acclimating. I was beginning to think I might actually be good at this. It was night 5 when the footsteps started. I was in the cot, not sleeping yet, reading by the light of a small LED clip light I'd attached to the edge of my book. The lantern was off. The radio was hissing. It was maybe 11 o'clock, and I heard very clearly the sound of someone walking below the tower, footsteps on the forest floor, on leaves and dirt and sticks. Slow, steady, even. The deliberate pace of someone walking the perimeter of a space the way you'd walk around a car or a building, assessing it. Left, right, left, right. The sound was distinct and unmistakable. It was not a deer, it was not a bear. I'd heard both during the day, and they didn't sound like this. This was bipedal. This was a person's gait. My first thought was practical. Someone was down there. A hiker who'd gotten turned around. A hunter who'd wandered onto Forest Service land. Someone who'd seen the tower and come to investigate. I should get up and call down to them. I should radio the district station. But I didn't get up. And I want to be honest about why. It wasn't because of the rules. I'd already half forgotten the rules by that point. It was because of the sound itself. There was something about those footsteps that made me not want to move. I lay in the cot, and I listened, and I tried to identify what was wrong. Because something was wrong. I could feel it. A discord, a note that didn't belong. It took me several minutes to figure it out. The footsteps were too even. That's what it was. They were metronomically regular, each one exactly the same distance apart, each one landing with exactly the same force. Like a metronome, like a clock. A person walking on uneven ground in the dark, on forest floor covered in leaves and roots and rocks, would vary their pace. They'd stumble. They'd slow down and speed up. They'd step lightly over a root and heavily into a dip. These footsteps didn't do any of that. They were perfect. Mechanically, unnaturally perfect. I lay there and I listened, and the footsteps went around and around the base of the tower, circuit after circuit, and I counted the circuits to give my mind something to hold on to. I counted 12 before I lost track. Each circuit took approximately 90 seconds. The footsteps did not pause, did not speed up, did not slow down, did not stop. Then they stopped. Not gradually, not like someone walking away. Between one step and the next, silence. The footsteps were there, and then they weren't, like a recording being switched off. One moment the sound, the next moment nothing. And the nothing that followed was worse than the sound. Because in the nothing was the implication that whatever had been walking was still there, still standing in the dark at the base of the tower, still and silent and present. I did not move. I did not get up, and I didn't go to the window. I lay in the cot with my book still open on my chest and the LED light still on, and I stared at the ceiling, and I breathed, and I waited. I waited a long time, maybe an hour, maybe more, and then I fell asleep, or something close to sleep, a thin and restless unconsciousness that broke with the first gray light of dawn. In the morning, I went down the stairs and walked the perimeter of the tower base. The ground was soft from recent rain, and I looked for prints. What I found were marks, impressions in the dirt and leaves, roughly circular, evenly spaced, forming a ring around the tower's footings. They were vague. They could have been anything. They could have been made by an animal or by water or by the settling of the ground itself. But they were there. And they followed the path I'd heard the footsteps trace. And they were evenly spaced. I went back up to the cab. I sat at the desk. I looked at the laminated sheet. I reread Rule 3. You may hear sounds outside at night. Footsteps below the tower. Movement in the brush. Knocking on the door or on the windows. Do not respond to any of these sounds. I sat there for a long time. I'm going to tell you what I told myself, because I think it's important to understand how a person rationalizes. I told myself it was an animal, a bear probably. Bears walk on their hind legs sometimes. Bears are curious about structures. A bear had come to investigate the tower and had walked around it a few times and then left. The regularity of the footsteps was an artifact of my perception, my brain imposing pattern on something random because I was in a dark room in an unfamiliar place, and I was primed by a stupid laminated list to interpret ordinary things as extraordinary. That's what I told myself, and I believed it, not fully, not in the part of me that had lain in the dark and listened and felt that wrongness, but in the part of me that needed to stay in this job and earn this money and not be the person who quit after 5 days because he heard an animal walk around a tower in the woods. That part believed it entirely. Days 6 through 9. The footsteps came back on night 6 and night 8. Same pattern, same rhythm, same perfect regularity, same abrupt cessation. I lay in the cot each time, and I did not respond. And I did not go to the window, and I told myself, bear, bear. It's a bear. On night 7, making no footsteps, but something else. I was at the desk, writing in my logbook by the light of the kerosene lantern. It was late, maybe midnight. The radio was hissing on Channel 4. I was writing about the weather, I think. A front had come through that day, and I was noting the cloud formations and the wind shift. And as I was writing, I became aware of something, a change in the radio's sound. The static was thinning. That's the best way I can describe it. The dense, even hiss was becoming patchy, developing gaps, like a fabric being pulled apart to reveal what was behind it. I stopped writing. I looked at the radio. The power light was steady, the volume was low, but the static was changing, opening up, and in the spaces between the hiss there was something. Not a voice, not yet. A texture, a shape in the noise, like hearing a conversation through a wall. Not the words, but the rhythm, the rise and fall, the cadence of speech without the content. I remembered Rule 2. If the static changes, if it goes silent, develops a pattern, or if you hear any clear sound through it, turn the radio off immediately. I reached over and turned off the radio. The click of the knob was sharp in the sudden quiet. The static stopped. The room was silent. I sat there with my hands still on the radio for a long time, and then I turned off the lantern and got into the cot and lay in the dark. Without the radio's hiss, the silence was enormous. It filled the room like pressure. And in that silence, I could hear the forest with terrible clarity. The wind had died down. The trees were still. And somewhere, out in the dark, something was moving. Not the regular footsteps I'd heard before, something else. A single soft, intermittent rustling, like something shifting its weight. It came from the north side, the direction of the dead tree. I did not go to the window. I pulled the sleeping bag up around my shoulders, and I closed my eyes and I concentrated on breathing, slow and steady, in and out, in and out. And eventually the sound stopped, or I stopped hearing it, or I fell asleep. And in the morning, the world was bright and clear and normal. I checked the dead tree that morning. From the north-facing window without binoculars, a brief glance the way Rule 4 specified. The tree was the same, bare, white, empty, but something was different. I don't know how to describe this accurately. The tree looked the same. Nothing in it had changed that I could point to, but it felt different. It felt like it was more present than it had been, more there, as though someone had adjusted the contrast on a photograph, and the tree had become sharper, more defined, more itself, while everything around it had softened. I stared at it for a moment longer than I should have, and then I pulled my eyes away and went on with my day. Night 10. The knocking started. I was in the cot, halfway between sleep and waking, in that loose, drifting state where sounds from the outside world blend with the edges of dreams. And then sharp and clear, cutting through everything, 3 knocks on the cab door. I was instantly awake, fully, completely, icily awake. The cab door was at the top of a 60-foot tower. The staircase was old and wooden and creaked with every step. I had not heard anyone or anything on the stairs. There had been no footsteps, no creaking, no sound of approach. There had been silence, and then there had been knocking. 3 knocks. Even. Deliberate. The kind of knock you'd hear at your front door in the middle of a Saturday afternoon. A visitor's knock. Polite. Expectant. I lay in the cot. My heart was going so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I did not move. I did not breathe. I waited. 30 seconds, then again. 3 knocks, same rhythm, same spot on the door, same polite, patient quality. Rule 3. Do not respond to any of these sounds. Do not go to the window to look. Do not call out. Continue whatever you are doing as if you did not hear anything. It is not enough to not respond. You must behave as if the sound is not occurring. I made myself breathe. I made my body relax, muscle by muscle, starting with my hands, and I softened my grip on the sleeping bag. I unclenched my jaw. I thought about what act naturally meant when you're lying in a cot at midnight 50 feet in the air and something is knocking on a door that nothing should be able to reach. I decided that a natural thing to do would be to shift in my sleep, to roll over. So I did. I turned on my side, facing away from the door, and I pulled the sleeping bag up and I closed my eyes and I tried to inhabit the role of a person who was sleeping and heard nothing and knew nothing and was alone. The knocking continued. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Pause. Consistent intervals about 30 seconds apart, each set identical. I counted 17 sets before it stopped. In the silence after, I lay rigid in the cot, not moving, not opening my eyes, And I became aware of something that raised the hair on my arms. I could feel a presence on the other side of the door. I don't mean I heard something. I mean I felt it. The way you feel someone standing behind you in a room. The way you feel someone watching you before you turn around and see them. There was a weight on the other side of that door, an attention, a focus, and it was directed at me. Through the wood and the latch and the small gap at the threshold, something was standing on the landing outside the door, and it was aware of me. It was listening. Not for a response. It knew I was there. It was listening to determine whether I knew it was there. I kept my breathing even. I kept my body slack. I played the role of a sleeping person with everything I had, and I've never worked so hard at anything in my life. Eventually, I don't know when, the feeling faded, the presence withdrew or thinned or turned its attention elsewhere. I felt the change the way you feel the sun come out from behind a cloud, a lightning, a release of pressure. And then I was alone again, truly alone, in the cab, in the dark, in the mountains. And the wind came up softly, and the tower creaked, and the radio on the desk hissed its static, and the night went on. I'm going to compress the next several days because the individual events matter less than the pattern. What you need to understand is that the pattern was escalating, not dramatically, not quickly, but consistently. Night 12. Footsteps again, but this time not just at the base. At some point during the circuits, the sound moved upward, onto the stairs, 1 step, 2, 3. Then a pause. Then, very slowly, 1 more step, or the creaking of the treads under weight. Something was coming up the stairs. I lay in the cot, and I did not move and I did not breathe, and the steps went up about halfway, perhaps the 3rd landing, and then stopped. And then after a long silence, went back down, slowly, step by step, until the ground. And then the circuits resumed. Night 13. The light appeared. I was at the desk, logbook open, lantern on, and I glanced out the south-facing window, and there it was. In the valley, maybe a mile away, maybe 2. A warm, steady, yellowish light, like a lantern or a flashlight. It was stationary at first, just sitting there in the dark forest like a single star that had fallen into the trees. I watched it. I couldn't help it. The rule said, don't signal it, don't try to identify it. It didn't say don't look. So I looked, or I sat at the desk and I watched the light. And after perhaps 5 minutes, it began to move. It moved the way nothing human moves. Smoothly, evenly, without the bobbing or swaying that a person carrying a light source would produce. It glided through the forest in a straight line heading south, and then it changed direction heading east, and then it stopped. And then it went out, not faded, out, like a switch. I closed the south-facing shutter. I got into the cot. I lay in the dark, and I told myself, someone with a flashlight, a camper, a night hiker, someone. But the way it had moved, the smoothness, the geometric precision of the direction changes. People don't move like that in a forest at night. People stumble and wander and follow the path of least resistance. This had moved like something on a track, like something that didn't need to navigate because the forest was not an obstacle for it. Night 14. The knocking came back, but this time not on the door. On the north-facing window. 3 taps. Gentle, almost delicate, like a fingertip on glass. The north-facing window that looked out toward the dead tree. The north-facing window that was 60 feet above the ground, with nothing near it, no branches, no structure, nothing that could reach it. Tap, tap, tap. I was in the cot. I did not open my eyes. I did not turn toward the sound. The tapping came again and again, each time the same. 3 taps, 30-second pause, 3 taps, patient, rhythmic, like the knocking on the door, like the footsteps on the ground, the same metronomic consistency, the same mechanical perfection. It went on for over an hour. I counted the sets to keep myself anchored. Over 100 sets. Over 300 taps on the glass of a window 60 feet in the air. And then it stopped, and the silence came back, and I lay in the cot and waited for dawn and tried not to think about what could reach that high. Day 15 was supply day. The truck came up the road in the late morning. The driver was a young guy named Chris who was friendly and talkative and seemed genuinely happy to have someone to talk to, which made me think his own job was not exactly a social whirlwind. He helped me unload the supplies, and we sat on the steps at the base of the tower, and he ate a sandwich and told me about a fire the next county over. Small, contained, quickly. Nothing serious. He asked how I was doing. I said fine. I almost said more. I almost told him about the footsteps and the knocking and the light. I looked at his face. His normal, open, uncomplicated face. And I imagined the expression it would take on if I told him that something knocked on my windows at night 60 feet in the air. I imagined the report he'd file when he got back to the station. I imagined the phone call from Janet telling me my services were no longer needed. Thank you, we'll mail your last check. I said fine. He left. The truck went down the road. The sound faded. The quiet came back. That afternoon I did something I hadn't done before. I sat at the desk and I studied the laminated sheet systematically. Not reading the rules themselves, but reading the spaces between them. And the introduction said the author had not followed all of the rules and was writing the list because of what happened after. I tried to work out which rules would be hardest to follow, which ones you might break without meaning to. Rule 5. The urge to go outside between 1 and 4 a.m. struck me as the most insidious because it was about internal experience rather than external behavior. You could follow rules 1 through 4 and 6 and 7 perfectly and still fail Rule 5 because you couldn't distinguish your own thoughts from something else's. But that was a rule about resistance, about staying put against an impulse. It would be hard, but it would be passive. You just have to not move. Rule 4 was different. Rule 4 required an active restraint of a specific, concrete temptation. There is a dead tree. Shuck, you will see something in it. You will want to know what it is. You have binoculars right there on the desk. Do not use them. Why? Why specifically binoculars? What was the difference between seeing something at a distance with your naked eyes and seeing it up close through lenses? The image was the same. The object was the same. The only difference was detail, resolution, clarity. With my eyes, I could see a shape. With binoculars, I could see what the shape was, its features, its face if it had a face. And there it was. The word I'd been circling around. Face. Rule 4 was about preventing me from seeing its face, or more precisely, it was about preventing a particular kind of seeing. Not a glance, not a vague awareness. The rule allowed me to check the tree with my naked eyes. It allowed me to know something was there. Or what it prohibited was the act of looking closely, of studying, of trying to identify what I was seeing. It prohibited the transition from noticing to recognizing. I sat with that thought for a while. It connected to something. I could feel it, but I couldn't see the full shape of it yet. Night 16. The tapping on the north window again. I lay in the cot and did not respond. But this time there was something additional. After the tapping stopped, maybe 20 minutes later, I heard a sound that was new. A sound from outside, from the direction of the dead tree. A kind of creak. Not the creak of the tower, which I knew well by now. A different creak. Organic. Like a tree branch bending under weight. Like something heavy settling into wood. I did not open the shutter. I did not look. I pulled the sleeping bag over my head and I pressed my face into the thin pillow, and I thought about money. I thought about my bank account. I thought about the specific dollar amount I needed to not lose my apartment when I got back. I thought about numbers, because numbers were real and solid and they didn't tap on windows in the dark. Day 17. Morning check on the dead tree. I opened the north-facing shutter and I looked. There was something in the tree. High up, maybe 3/4 of the way, where a thick branch forked from the trunk. A dark shape. A mass. Something that had not been there the day before. It was too far away to make out clearly with my naked eyes. It was roughly the size of a person. It was dark. It appeared to be sitting or crouching in the fork of the branch. It was motionless. My binoculars were on the desk, 6 inches from my right hand. I looked at the shape. I looked at the binoculars. I looked at the shape. Rule 4. Under no circumstances should you use binoculars or any magnification device to look at this tree or anything in it. I noted the time in my logbook. I closed the north-facing shutter. I sat at the desk, and I stared at the closed shutter, and my heart was beating very fast, and my mouth was dry, and the binoculars sat on the desk like a dare. I did not touch them. At the evening check, the shape was gone. The tree was bare. I noted that too. Day 18. Morning check. Nothing in the tree. Evening check. The shape was back. Same position, same size. Dark, motionless. Too far to identify without magnification. Day 19. Morning. Shape still there. Evening. Gone. Day 20. Morning. Nothing. Evening. There. Slightly lower in the tree, I thought. Closer to the trunk. But I wasn't sure. I was only glancing. The rule said, glance, assess, and look away. So I glanced, and I assessed, and I looked away. And I closed the shutter. And I sat at the desk. And the binoculars were right there. Here is what was happening to me, and I want to describe it precisely because I think it's the most important part of this whole story. The shape in the tree was becoming an obsession. Not a fearful obsession. A cognitive one. It was a question I couldn't answer, and the inability to answer it was eating at me. What was it? What was sitting in that tree? A bird's nest? A clump of dead leaves caught in the branches? A piece of debris? An animal? And if it was something else, something that the rules implied it might be, then what did it look like? What was its shape? What were its features? The not knowing was worse than knowing would have been. I was sure of this. If I'd been able to look through the binoculars and see that it was a vulture or a raccoon or a garbage bag blown up from somewhere, the whole thing would have collapsed. The fear would have evaporated. I would have laughed. I would have radioed the district station and said, "Hey, you'll never guess what the last guy here was afraid of. There's a literal plastic bag stuck in a tree and he thought it was a monster." But I couldn't look. The rule said not to look. And the rule had been write about the footsteps and write about the knocking and write about the radio and write about the light. Every rule I could test had been confirmed. The things the rules described were real, so maybe Rule 4 was real too. Maybe there was a reason not to look. And maybe the reason was something worse than what I was imagining. But the imagining was its own kind of torture. That's the thing. At night, lying in the cot, trying to sleep, my mind would go to the tree. It would construct images. It would try to fill in the details that my eyes couldn't resolve. And the images it constructed were not comforting. They were dark and shapeless and wrong, and they shifted every time I tried to focus on them. And the not knowing fed the fear, and the fear fed the not knowing, and the whole thing spiraled. And I started dreaming about the tree. I dreamed I was standing at the north-facing window with the binoculars in my hands, lifting them to my eyes, adjusting the focus. And just as the image began to sharpen, just as the shape began to resolve into something recognizable, I'd wake up. Every time. Right at the moment of recognition, I'd wake up in the dark with my heart hammering and the shape still formless behind my eyes. Day 21. The shape was in the tree at both checks, morning and evening. It hadn't moved. I stared at it, squinting, trying to resolve it with my unaided eyes. I could make out what might have been limbs. Something that could have been the angle of a bent leg, something that might have been an arm or a branch, or nothing. It was maddening. It was right there. 150 yards. The binoculars on the desk would have made it as clear as if it were 10 feet away. I closed the shutter. I sat at the desk. I opened my book. I tried to read. The words swam. I put the book down. I picked up the binoculars, just to hold them, just to feel their weight. I put them back down. Night 21, no footsteps, no knocking, no light. The radio hissed steadily on Channel 4. The forest was silent. Everything was silent. It was the quietest night since I'd arrived. I lay in the cot and I stared at the dark ceiling and I could not sleep. Not because of fear, because of the question. What was in the tree? What was in the tree? What was in the tree? Day 22. Morning check. The shape was there. Lower. Noticeably lower. It was maybe halfway up the tree now, and it seemed larger or closer or more distinct. I could see it more clearly with my naked eyes than I'd been able to the previous days. Not because my vision had improved, but because it was nearer. It was descending the tree. Slowly, over the course of days, it was coming down. I noted it in the logbook. I closed the shutter. I went to the south-facing window and I stood there and I looked out at the mountains and I breathed and I tried to think clearly. The shape was coming down the tree. It was moving. It was descending toward the ground, toward the tower. What would happen when it reached the ground? What would happen when it was no longer up in the branches but down in the clearing, 150 yards from the base of the tower? Would it stay there? Would it come closer? I needed to see what it was. The need was physical. It was like thirst. It was like the need to scratch an itch that's been building for days. It occupied the center of my mind and everything else orbited around it. I did my weather readings. I scanned for smoke. I ate. I logged. I did all the things I was supposed to do. Oh, but underneath all of it, the question pulsed like a heartbeat. What is it? What is it? What is it? Night 22 was when the radio changed again. I was in the cot, not sleeping, lying on my back in the dark, and the radio was hissing on Channel 4 and the static thinned. It didn't just thin, it opened, like a curtain being drawn back. The hiss became patchy, became intermittent, and in the gaps there was something that was not static and not silence, a voice, low, murmuring, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. It was like hearing someone talking in another room. the rhythm and melody of speech, but not the words themselves. I got up, I went to the desk. I should have turned the radio off. Rule 2 was very clear, but I didn't turn it off. I stood over the radio and I listened. The voice was low and steady, and it had a quality that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was almost familiar. Not the voice itself, but the cadence, the rhythm, the way the words, whatever they were, rose and fell. It sounded like someone explaining something, patiently, reasonably, the way you'd talk to someone you were trying to convince. I turned it off. The silence that followed was enormous. I went back to the cot. I did not sleep. Day 23. This is the day. I need to go slow here. I need to get this right. Morning check. I opened the north-facing shutter and I looked at the dead tree. The shape was at the base. It was no longer in the branches. It was at the base of the trunk, on the ground or very near the ground. It was dark. It was approximately the size of a person. It was motionless. And it was facing the tower. I say it was facing the tower, and I know you'll ask how I could tell from 150 yards with my naked eyes, and the answer is I don't know. I just knew. The way you know when someone across a crowded room is looking at you. Not because you can see their eyes, but because you can feel the direction of their attention. The shape was oriented toward me. Its front, whatever its front was aimed at the tower. I closed the shutter. I noted the time. I sat at the desk. I put my head in my hands. The shape had descended the tree over the course of 6 days. Slowly, patiently, not in a rush, as if it had all the time in the world. And now it was on the ground, 150 yards from where I sat. I did my readings. I did my scans. I did my check-in. Maddox Station all clear. I ate something, and I don't remember what. The day passed in a fog of anxiety and the grinding, relentless need to know. Evening check. The shape was still at the base of the tree, still facing the tower, still motionless. The light was low, the sun already behind the western ridgeline, and in the amber evening light, the dead tree cast a long shadow, and the shape at its base was just a darkness within a darkness. I squinted, I strained. I tried to make out detail. I couldn't. It was too far. I needed the binoculars. I closed the shutter. I latched the door. I turned the radio to channel 4. I lit the lantern. I sat at the desk. The binoculars were right there, right in front of me. I want to tell you that I struggled with the decision. I want to tell you that I weighed the evidence and considered the consequences and made a careful, deliberate choice. But that's not what happened. What happened was that I spent the evening in a state of increasing agitation, a restlessness that felt chemical, that felt like it was in my blood, and the agitation built and built, and I tried to read and I couldn't read, and I tried to play cards and I couldn't focus, and I tried to write in my logbook and the words came out wrong. And the whole time the north-facing shutter was closed, and behind it was the window, and beyond the window was the tree, and at the base of the tree was the shape, and the shape was facing me, and I could not see what it was. I turned off the lantern at 11. I got into the cot. I closed my eyes. I tried to sleep. I could not sleep. The restlessness was worse in the dark. It was a physical pressure, an itching behind my eyes, a tension in my hands that made them want to reach. Did you want to grab, want to lift the binoculars and bring them to my face? Rule 5. Between the hours of 1 and 4 a.m., you may feel a strong urge. It will feel entirely natural. These feelings are not yours. Was this that? Was this Rule 5? The urge to go outside? No, I didn't want to go outside. I wanted to look. I wanted to see. Was there a difference? The rules didn't cover this exactly. Rule 5 was about going outside. Rule 4 was about the binoculars. They were different rules, different prohibitions. The restlessness I felt wasn't the urge to open the door. It was the urge to open the shutter, to raise the binoculars, to look. I lay in the cot. The dark was absolute. The radio hissed. The tower creaked. The wind was still. Outside, the forest was silent. So silent it seemed to be listening. And I was listening too. And the whole world was holding its breath. At some point, I must have slept, or half slept, because time jumped. One moment I was lying in the cot, staring at nothing, and the next I was aware that time had passed. A gap in my consciousness, a splice in the film. I was still in the cot, I was still on my back, but something had changed. The quality of the dark had changed. It felt closer, denser, more attentive. And then I heard it. From outside, from the north side, from the direction of the dead tree. A sound. Not footsteps, not knocking, not tapping. A new sound. A sound I'd never heard before, and have never heard since, and that I hear now, 3 years later, in the moments before I fall asleep, every single night. It was a creak. A long, slow, wooden creak, like a branch bending, like a door opening. But it wasn't a branch, and it wasn't a door. It was sustained, a continuous sound rising in pitch, as if something very large was shifting its weight, was unfolding, was standing up, and then immediately after, a single step, one footstep, heavy, close. Not at the base of the tower, not 150 yards away. Close, in the clearing, between the tree and the tower, one step toward me. The sound broke something in me, some restraining wall, some rational governor that had been holding the machinery of my fear in check. The sound of that single step, that one heavy footfall in the dark, so much closer than the shape in the tree should have been, so much closer than 150 yards, broke me. I got out of the cot. I crossed the room. I opened the north-facing shutter. I picked up the binoculars from the desk. I brought them to my eyes. My watch said 2:13 a.m. The binoculars were good ones. Government issue, high magnification. Even in the dark, even in the starlight that was all the illumination available, they gathered enough light to show me the tree. The white bone of its trunk, the pale reaching arms of its branches against the slightly lighter sky, and at the base of the tree where the shape had been. Nothing. The base was empty. The shape was gone. I adjusted the focus. I swept the binoculars slowly across the clearing, from the tree toward the tower, tracing the path the footstep had implied. Dead leaves, bare ground, the gray shapes of rocks, the dark edge of the forest. And then I found it. It was standing in the clearing, about 60 yards from the tower, in the open, upright. I want to describe what I saw, and I want to be careful, because what I saw was not entirely clear, even through the binoculars. And I don't want to add details that my memory has constructed after the fact. So here is what I am certain of. It was tall. Taller than a person by at least a foot, maybe more. It was thin, very thin, with proportions that were wrong in a way I couldn't immediately identify. Too long in some places. The limbs were too long. The arms, if they were arms, hung down past where the knees would be on a person. It was dark, not black, but dark, the color of old wood or dried leaves, a color that belonged in the forest, but not on a standing figure. It was standing still, completely, absolutely, perfectly still, with the same mechanical stillness as the footsteps' mechanical regularity. Not the stillness of something at rest, but the stillness of something that was not moving because it had not decided to move. An active, chosen stillness. And it was facing me. I could not see its face. The binoculars were good, but the light was too low and the distance was still significant, and whatever features it had were indistinct. Dark on dark. A suggestion of shape without detail. But I knew it was facing me. I knew it was looking at the tower, looking at the window, looking at the exact spot where I stood, with the binoculars pressed to my eyes. And then it did something. It tilted its head. A small movement, a slight tilt, maybe 15 degrees, the way a dog tilts its head when it hears a sound it doesn't understand, or the way a person tilts their head when they recognize someone. A quizzical, almost gentle gesture. Oh, there you are. I lowered the binoculars. When I stepped back from the window, I closed the shutter. I went to the cot. I got in. I pulled the sleeping bag over my head. I pressed my hands over my ears, and I squeezed my eyes shut, and I lay there and I shook. That is what happened at 2:13 a.m. on the 23rd night. I broke Rule 4. I used the binoculars. I saw it. And in the moment that I saw it, in the moment that the binoculars resolved the shape from a vague darkness into a figure, a tall, thin, wrong figure standing in the clearing looking at my window, something happened that I cannot undo. A transaction occurred. I saw it and it saw me seeing it. The tilt of the head, the recognition. Oh, there you are. The bridge was built. I need to tell you what happened next, and I need to tell you carefully, and because the difference between before and after the binoculars is the heart of this entire thing. Everything I've described up to this point, the footsteps, the knocking, the tapping, the light, the radio, all of it was testing, probing. It was the behavior of something trying to establish contact, trying to get a response. But the contact it was seeking wasn't physical. It wasn't trying to get in. It was trying to be seen. And the rules were designed to prevent exactly that, not to hide me from it. It already knew I was there. The rules were designed to prevent me from demonstrating that I knew it was there. The rules maintained a fiction, a pretense, a one-way mirror. I could exist in the tower, and it could exist in the forest. And as long as neither of us acknowledged the other, as long as the mirror held, some boundary remained intact. And I shattered the mirror. I didn't just glance at the tree from 150 yards. I picked up binoculars and I looked at it and I saw it, and it saw me see it, and now it knew. It knew that I knew it was there. It knew that I had seen its shape and its height and its proportions and the tilt of its head. It knew I had tried to see its face. The pretense was over. The fiction was collapsed. We had recognized each other, and immediately everything changed. Night 23, the rest of it. After I closed the shutter and got into the cot, there was perhaps 10 minutes of silence. And then the footsteps came. But not from the ground, not from the base of the tower, from the stairs, starting at the bottom and coming up. They were slow, each step deliberate, each creak of the old wood distinct and sharp. One step, pause, another step, pause, and I could track the progression by the sound. First flight, second flight, third flight, each one closer, each creak louder. And the pauses between steps were long, savoring, as if whatever was climbing the stairs was in no hurry, because it knew the door at the top was just a door and the person behind it was just a person, and neither of those things was an obstacle anymore. The footsteps reached the top landing, the landing outside the cab door. I heard the last step, the creak of the board directly outside the door, and then silence. Total, absolute silence. And then the knocking. But not 3 knocks, 1 knock, a single firm knock. Not polite, not tentative. Certain. The knock of someone who knows they're expected. I did not answer. I lay in the cot, and I did not move, and I did not speak, and I tried to perform the fiction that I was asleep, that I heard nothing, that I knew nothing, but it felt hollow. It felt like lying to someone who'd already caught you. The mirror was broken. The pretense was transparent. I had looked through the binoculars, and it had seen me look, and we both knew what I knew. Another knock. Single. Patient. And then something happened that I have replayed in my mind more times than I can count. I heard the door handle move. Not violently, not aggressively. The slow, quiet movement of a handle being tested, tried. The way you'd try a door to see if it was locked. The latch held. The door didn't open, but the handle moved down and then back up. And the sound it made was the most ordinary sound in the world. The sound of someone trying a doorknob. And the ordinariness of it was the worst part, because it meant that what was on the other side of the door understood doors, understood handles, understood the mechanism by which a person enters a room. The handle went back to its resting position. Silence. I waited. I waited for hours. The footsteps did not go back down the stairs. I did not hear it leave. It was either still on the landing, or it had gone in a way that didn't make sound, the way it had arrived at the door those earlier nights without making sound on the stairs. I didn't know which was worse. Dawn came. It always comes. The light seeped through the shutter edges, and the darkness thinned, and the birds started up in the forest below. And I lay in the cot, and I waited until the light was full and strong. And then I got up and I unlatched the door and I opened it, and the landing was empty. The stairs were empty. In the morning light, everything looked normal. But the clearing. I went to the north-facing window and I opened the shutter and I looked out. The dead tree was the same. Bare. White. Empty. But between the tree and the tower, in the dirt and leaves of the clearing, there were marks. Not footprints exactly, impressions. Long, narrow, unevenly spaced. Leading from the base of the tree in a straight line toward the tower. They didn't look like shoe prints. They didn't look like animal tracks. They looked like someone had pressed the edge of a long, thin object into the ground at intervals, or like something with feet that were not quite the right shape had walked across the clearing. And at the base of the tower, where the marks ended and the staircase began, I found something else. On the lowest step, in the soft wood of the tread, there were scratches. Long, parallel scratches, as if something had gripped the edge of the step while climbing. The scratches were narrow and deep, and there were 4 of them, evenly spaced, and they were new. The wood inside them was pale and fresh. I went back up to the cab. I sat at the desk. I looked at the laminated sheet. I reread the introduction. I made that mistake, and I am writing this list because of what happened after. The previous lookout had broken a rule, too. Maybe the same rule, maybe Rule 4. Maybe they'd stood at this same window with these same binoculars and looked at the same shape in the same tree, and seen the same tilt of the head. And whatever had happened after had been bad enough that they'd laminated a sheet of paper and taped it to the desk and left it for the next person, hoping the next person would be stronger or smarter or more disciplined than they were. I had not been stronger or smarter or more disciplined. I had looked. And now the thing in the forest had climbed my stairs and tried my door, and I was sitting in a glass box on top of a wooden frame in the middle of an ancient forest, and I had 35 days left in my rotation, and I was more afraid than I have ever been in my life. The days that followed were a different kind of experience. Before the binoculars, the nights had been frightening but contained. The sounds came and went, and the rules held, and there was a structure to the fear, a rhythm, a set of predictable events that I could endure because I knew what to expect. After the binoculars, the containment was gone. The footsteps no longer circled the base. They came straight to the stairs and up, every night, all the way to the top. I would lie in the cot and listen to the slow, deliberate ascent, step by step, creak by creak, and then the silence on the landing, and then the single knock, and then the handle. Every night the handle was tested. Every night the latch held. But the testing was patient. It was not frustration. It was not desperation. It was the methodical, unhurried testing of a boundary by something that expected, in time, the boundary to give. The knocking changed, too. It was no longer only on the door and the north-facing window. It came on all 4 windows. It came at different times. Sometimes early, 9 or 10 p.m. Sometimes very late, 3 or 4 a.m. It was no longer 3 polite taps. It was a single knock, sometimes on the glass, sometimes on the frame, and it was harder than before. More confident, like someone knocking on a door they know you're standing behind. I know you're in there. I know you can hear me. And the tapping on the glass. I don't know how to describe the change, except to say that it became more specific. It was no longer random taps on random windows. It was taps on the window nearest to wherever I was. If I was at the desk, the tap came on the south-facing window behind me. If I was in the cot, the tap came on the east-facing window beside me, as if whatever was outside could see me through the shutters, as if it knew exactly where I was in the room. I kept the shutters closed, all of them, all the time, even during the day. I couldn't stand the thought of the windows being uncovered. I did my weather readings by opening a shutter, taking the readings quickly and closing it again. I did my horizon scans the same way. I was living in a closed box, shuttered and latched, and the darkness inside felt safer than to the visibility. But the worst change was the most subtle, and it took me several nights to identify it. The sounds were no longer random. They were responsive. They were reacting to me. If I shifted in the cot, the tapping would start on the window nearest my head. If I got up to use the bucket, the footsteps on the landing would pause and then resume. If I held my breath, the silence outside would deepen, as if something else was holding its breath too. And when I exhaled, I would hear or think I heard. It's a soft exhalation from outside, an echo, a mirror. It was mimicking me. It was learning my rhythms, my breathing, my movements, my patterns of sleep and waking. It was paying attention to me the way I had paid attention to it through the binoculars, and the attention was detailed and patient and precise. And it felt, God help me, it felt like fascination, like something that had finally gotten a good look at a creature it had been curious about for a long time and was now studying it with all the focus it had. I had looked at it, and now it was looking at me, and the looking was not going to stop. Night 27 was when it used my name. I was in the cot. It was late, past midnight, and the footsteps had come up the stairs and stopped on the landing, and the single knock had come, and the handle had been tested. And I'd been through the routine, lying still, breathing evenly, performing sleep. And I was waiting for the silence that usually followed. But instead of silence, I heard a voice. From the landing, from directly outside the door, a voice speaking my name. My full name. First and last. I cannot describe the effect this had on me. My full name spoken in the dark, through the door, by something that should not have known it. I had followed Rule 6. I had never spoken my full name aloud. On the radio, I was Maddox. In my logbook, I used initials. Chris, the supply driver, knew my first name, but he'd never used my last name. My full name was not in the cab, was not on any visible surface, which was not spoken by any human voice within the hearing of anything that might have been listening. But it knew my name. The voice that said it was wrong. It was wrong in a way that I recognized immediately because I had heard wrongness before, in the footsteps that were too regular, in the knocking that was too consistent. The voice was almost right, almost human. It had the pitch and tone and timbre of a person speaking at a conversational distance. And if I'd heard it during the day, through a wall without context, I might have thought it was a person. But in the silence of the cab at midnight, with every sense I had straining to full capacity, the imperfection was audible. The voice had no breath, no warmth, no life behind it. It was the shape of speech without the substance, a copy, an imitation, and something that had heard how humans speak and had learned the sounds, but not the soul. It said my name again and again. The same flat, patient, rhythmic repetition as the knocking. My name. Pause. My name. Pause. Over and over, like it was trying to get my attention, like it was calling me the way you'd call someone in another room, like it expected me to answer. I clamped my hand over my mouth. I pressed my lips together so hard, my teeth cut the inside of my cheek. Because the urge to answer was overwhelming. It was reflexive. When someone says your name, you respond. You can't help it. It's wired into you at a level below conscious decision-making. Hearing your own name triggers a response in the brain that is almost impossible to suppress. I felt my throat constrict around the sound of a reply. I felt the word yes forming in my mouth. I felt my body trying to betray me, trying to complete the circuit, trying to answer the call. I did not answer. I pressed my hand over my mouth, and I bit down on the flesh of my palm, and I tasted blood, and I did not answer. But it was the closest I came in all those nights to breaking. Not from fear, from recognition. It knew my name, and the sound of my name in its voice was the most horrible intimacy I have ever experienced. It was like being seen naked. It was like being known in a way that could not be undone. How did it get my name? I've asked myself this 1,000 times. I've gone over every possibility. And the only answer I've arrived at that makes sense, that aligns with the logic of everything else, is this. When I broke Rule 4, when I looked through the binoculars and saw it and it saw me, a channel opened, a conduit. The act of mutual recognition created a connection. And through that connection, information flowed. Not consciously, not deliberately, but the way a scent carries on the wind or a vibration carries through wood. I saw it and it saw me, and in that exchange, something about me was transmitted. My name, my identity, the specific, personal fact of who I am. Rule 6 made sense now. Don't say your name aloud. Don't write it where it can be seen. Because the thing in the forest could learn it, could take it, could use it. And once it had your name, it had you. Not physically, but in whatever way mattered, in whatever way made the bridge complete. I had given it my name by looking at it. The binoculars were the bridge. The recognition was the transmission. You, and now it stood outside my door and spoke my name in a voice that was almost human, and the word it spoke was me. Night 28. It spoke my name for 4 hours, from midnight to 4 a.m. The same pace, the same intervals, patient, tireless, confident, not demanding, not aggressive, just calling, just waiting for me to answer. I did not answer. Night 29. The same, but this time, between the repetitions of my name, it added something, words I couldn't make out. Murmured phrases, too low and indistinct to resolve with the cadence and rhythm of conversation, as if it was talking to me, having a conversation, as if it could hear my responses even though I wasn't making any, or as if my silence didn't matter, as if the conversation was happening regardless of my participation. Night 30. The voice was closer, not on the landing, at the door, pressed against the wood. I could hear the sound of it as if a mouth were touching the surface of the door, speaking directly into the grain. My name, and then the murmured phrases, and then my name again. And the quality of the voice was changing. It was getting better. The flatness was less flat. The imitation was more convincing. It was learning. Each night, each hour, each repetition, it was refining its mimicry, getting closer to human, getting closer to the kind of voice that might make me forget it wasn't real. I thought about the radio, the voice I'd heard in the static on night 7, the murmured, indistinct speech. Had that been a less refined version of what I was hearing now? Had it been practicing, learning, building toward this? I thought about Rule 2. Do not listen to what it says. The rule didn't say don't hear it. It said don't listen. There's a difference. Hearing is passive. Listening is active. Listening is attention. Listening is the audio equivalent of looking through binoculars. You don't just receive the sound. You focus on it, try to understand it, try to extract meaning, and meaning is recognition. Understanding is the bridge. I stopped trying to make out the murmured words. I stopped straining to hear them. I let them wash over me like static, like noise, like the sound of wind. I refused to listen. I refused to grant them the status of language. They were just sounds, just pressure waves in air. They meant nothing. But it was hard. God, it was hard. Because they sounded like they meant something. They sounded like answers to questions I hadn't asked. They sounded like explanations, like invitations. It's like someone on the other side of a door, patient and calm and reasonable, saying, "Come on, just open the door. I'm right here. I've been right here the whole time. You know me now and I know you, and the only thing between us is a piece of wood. Just open the door." I did not open the door. Day 31. I radioed the district station. I said, "Maddox Station requesting early departure. I need to come down." There was a pause, a long pause. Then, "Copy, Maddox." "Can you state the reason?" I said. "Personal reasons. Health concerns." Another pause. "We can have someone up there day after tomorrow. Can you hold until then?" 2 more nights. 2 more nights in the tower. I said yes. I said yes because I had to. Those last 2 nights. I don't know how to describe them without sounding like I'm exaggerating. And I am not exaggerating. And I need you to understand that I am telling you exactly what happened. Night 31. The voice came earlier than before. Not at midnight, at sunset. As soon as the light left the sky, as soon as the dark settled in, the voice was there. On the landing, at the door. My name, again and again. And the murmured words, louder now, more distinct, almost distinguishable, almost resolving into language that I could understand if I let myself listen, which I did not, which I refused to do. But there was something new. Between the repetitions, in the pauses where the voice went quiet, I heard something else. Breathing. Not my breathing. Breathing from outside the door. The slow, deep, even respiration of something alive. Something with lungs and air and the mechanical apparatus of breath, standing on the landing outside the door, breathing. It's the thing had not breathed before. In all the nights of footsteps and knocking and tapping, in all the times it had stood on the landing or at the windows, I had never heard it breathe. Breathing was new. Breathing was another step in the refinement. It was becoming more real, more present, more human. Each night it was closer to passing for something it was not. And I had started this process. I had looked at it through the binoculars, and I had given it a target to aim for. It was learning me, my name, my rhythms, my patterns, and it was using what it learned to build a better imitation, to narrow the gap between what it was and what I was. And the gap was narrowing. Night by night, hour by hour, the voice was warmer. The breathing was more natural. The footsteps on the stairs were less mechanical, more varied, more human. It was becoming a more convincing approximation of a person, and the person it was approximating was me. Night 32. The last night. I did not sleep. I sat at the desk with my back to the shuttered windows, and I kept the lantern on, and I stared at the laminated sheet of rules, and I listened and I waited. The voice came. My name, the murmured words, the breathing, the single knock, the handle, all of it, the full routine, performed with the same patience and the same persistence as every night before. But at some point, and I don't know what time this was because I had stopped looking at my watch, I had stopped keeping track, I was just enduring. At some point the voice stopped. The breathing stopped. The knocking stopped. Everything stopped. The silence was sudden and total. And in the silence I heard a different sound. Not from the landing. Not from outside the door, from below, from the clearing. A sound I'd heard once before on the night I broke Rule 4, the creak, the long, slow, organic creak of something large, shifting its weight, unfolding, standing up. And then footsteps, not on the stairs, on the ground, walking away from the tower. Slow, steady, receding, getting fainter, moving back toward the north side of the clearing, toward the dead tree. The footsteps went on for a long time, getting softer and softer, and then they stopped. And then, from far away, from the distance, from what I judged to be the direction of the dead tree, a single sound, a sigh, a long, low exhalation, the kind of sound something makes when it decides to wait, when it accepts that tonight is not the night, and when it settles back into the patience that is its natural state, the patience of something that has been here far longer than any person and will be here long after the last person is gone. And then nothing. Silence until dawn. The truck came in the morning. A driver I hadn't met before, an older man who was quiet and efficient. He helped me carry my things down the stairs. I did not look at the dead tree as we walked to the truck. I got in the passenger seat and I looked straight ahead, and we drove down the fire road, and the forest pressed in on both sides and the branches met overhead, and we descended the ridge and the tower receded behind us, and I did not look back. We reached the ranger station. I signed some paperwork. Janet was there, the woman who'd originally called me about the job. She asked if everything was all right. I said yes. She asked if there was anything about the posting I wanted to report. I said no. She gave me a check for the weeks I'd worked, and I took it, and I thanked her, and I got in my brother's car because he'd driven out to pick me up, and we went home. My brother asked what happened. I said the isolation got to me. He nodded. He didn't push it. He told me I was nuts for taking the job in the first place, and this was confirmation. And he was kind enough not to say so. I deposited the check. I got a job. Not a good job, but a job. I paid my rent. I started reassembling my life. I did not think about the tower or the tree or the rules. I refused to think about them. I packed the experience into a box in my mind and I sealed it and I put it on a high shelf and I decided it was over and I was fine and everything was normal. Except for the nights. In the first week back, I started waking up at 2 a.m. Not gradually, sharply. A sudden transition from deep sleep to full wakefulness, like being switched on. I'd lie in my bed in my apartment in Harrisonburg and I'd stare at the ceiling, and the room would be dark and quiet and ordinary, and I'd feel it. The presence, the attention, the weight of something focused on me from very far away or very close. I'd lie there and the feeling would build and I'd want to go to the window. The apartment was on the second floor and the window looked out onto a parking lot and there was nothing there. There was never anything there, but I'd feel the pull, the urge to get up and walk to the window and look out, to see if something was standing in the parking lot, in the dark, looking up. Rule 5. It will feel entirely natural when these feelings are not yours. I did not go to the window. I lay in bed and I waited, and eventually the feeling would fade and I'd sleep again, and in the morning everything would be normal. But it happened every night for weeks. 2 a.m. The waking, the pull, the feeling of being watched, the urge to look. It faded over time. By the second month, it was happening only a few times a week. By the third month, once or twice. By the sixth month, rarely. But it never stopped entirely. Even now, 3 years later, it happens. Maybe once, every couple of weeks. I wake up in the dark and the room feels different, and there's a pressure, an attention, a suggestion that something out there in the dark knows my name and is using it. Quietly, patiently, the way you'd call a cat, waiting for the night, I finally come to the window. And there's something else. Something I want to tell you and also don't want to tell you because telling it makes it more real, and the reality of it is the thing I have the hardest time with. About 3 months after I came down from the mountain, I was at a grocery store. Middle of the day, bright fluorescent lights, normal people doing normal things. I was in the cereal aisle. I remember this specifically. I was looking at boxes of cereal and trying to decide between 2 brands, and I got the feeling, not the nighttime feeling, something different, and the feeling of being watched, but not from a distance, from nearby, from within the store. I looked up. The aisle was empty except for one person, a man, standing at the far end, maybe 30 feet away. He was tall, thin. He was wearing ordinary clothes, jeans, and a dark jacket. He was standing very still. And he was looking at me. People look at other people in grocery stores. It's not unusual. It means nothing. But the way this man was looking at me made the blood drain from my face. He was looking at me with an intensity that was not casual, that was not accidental. It was focused, deliberate. The way you look at someone you recognize, the way you look at someone you've been looking for. And he tilted his head, a slight tilt, maybe 15 degrees, quizzical, almost gentle. I left my cart in the aisle. I walked out of the store. I got in my car and I drove home, and I locked the door and I sat on the couch and I shook for an hour. It was a person. It was a man in a grocery store who happened to look at me and tilt his head, and I was traumatized and hypervigilant, and I projected my fear onto a random stranger. And that's all it was. That is the rational explanation. And I have repeated it to myself so many times that it is smooth and polished and worn thin, and I can see through it the way I can see through all my rational explanations. But his proportions, standing there at the end of the aisle, tall and thin and still, the arms that hung a little too long, the way his head tilted with a precision that was mechanical rather than casual, the way he stood with the utter perfect stillness of something that was not at rest but was choosing not to move. I don't go back to that grocery store. I want to tell you one more thing. I want to tell you the thing that connects all of this, or the thing that I think I understand but wish I didn't. The rules were not about protection, not in the way I first assumed. The rules were about asymmetry. They were about maintaining an imbalance of knowledge. The thing in the forest knew the tower was there. It knew a person was inside. It came every night and circled and knocked and called. It already had its half of the equation. What it didn't have, what the rules were designed to prevent it from getting, was the other half. My awareness, my acknowledgement, my recognition of what it was. Because recognition is a two-way street. You can't truly see something without allowing it to see you. You can't truly know something without allowing it to know you. The act of looking through the binoculars was not passive observation. It was contact. It was reaching out across the dark and touching something and letting it touch me back. And once that contact was made, once the bridge was built, the thing in the forest was no longer a stranger. It was something that knew me, my name, my patterns, my rhythms, my shape, and my habits, and the specific frequency of my breath, and I knew it, its height, its proportions, its stillness, the tilt of its head. We were known to each other. And I think that's what it wants. I think that's all it wants. To be known, to be recognized, to build a bridge between itself and a person, and to cross that bridge and be present in that person's world. Not violently, not aggressively, patiently, gradually. The way the shape descended the tree, day by day, branch by branch, closer and closer. The way the voice improved, night by night, becoming more human, more warm, more convincing. The way the footsteps became less mechanical and more varied. It was learning to be a person because it wanted to exist among people. And the first step was being seen by one. And I saw it. I was that one. And now it exists in some way I can't fully define in my world. In the 2 a.m. wakings, in the pull toward the window, in the tall, thin man at the end of the cereal aisle, in the moments when I'm alone and the room goes quiet and the silence develops a weight and a texture and a quality of attention. It's here. It followed me. Not down the mountain, not in the truck. It followed me through the bridge I built when I looked at it through the binoculars at 2:13 a.m. on a dark night in the Appalachian Mountains. It followed me through the connection, through the knowing. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it wants beyond recognition. I don't know what would have happened if I'd opened the door. I don't know what will happen if I ever go to the window at 2 a.m. and look out. I don't know what I'd see. That's a lie. I think I do know what I'd see. I think I'd see a tall, thin figure standing in the parking lot below my window looking up, perfectly still, with its head tilted slightly to one side. And I think if I saw it, something would change again. Another rule broken, another bridge built, another step closer to whatever the end of this is. So I don't go to the window, but there's something I haven't admitted to you yet. and it's the thing that scares me more than any of the rest of it. More than the footsteps. More than the voice. More than the man in the grocery store. I want to go to the window. Not because I'm scared and drawn to the thing I'm scared of. Not because of morbid curiosity. I want to go to the window because the urge to go to the window feels like my own idea. It feels natural. It feels like a reasonable thing to do. It feels like something I'd decide on my own, for my own reasons, without any outside influence. It feels like the most normal thing in the world to get out of bed at 2 in the morning and walk to the window and look out at the dark. And Rule 5 says, these feelings are not yours, but they feel like mine. They feel exactly like mine. And I don't know anymore where I end and the bridge begins. The tower is still there. Maddox Station, on the ridge, in the mountains. I looked it up once, about a year ago, on a map. It's still listed as an active fire lookout. Someone is up there right now, probably. Anthony's sitting at the desk, reading the rules, checking the dead tree, lying in the cot at night, listening to the footsteps, the knocking on the static on Channel 4. I hope they follow the rules. I hope they're stronger than I was. I hope they don't look through the binoculars. But late at night, in the bad moments, in the 2 a.m. moments when the room is dark and the silence is heavy and the pull toward the window is strong, I think about something else. I think about the fact that the previous lookout broke a rule too, and the one before them probably, and the one before that. I think about the laminated sheet, yellowed under its plastic, taped to the desk with care and permanence, and I wonder how many people have read those rules and followed them, and how many have broken them, and how many are lying in their own beds right now, are in their own apartments, in their own cities, feeling the same pull toward the same window, hearing the same silence develop the same weight. And I wonder if the thing in the forest is not one thing but many, or if it is one thing that has built many bridges. If every person who looked through the binoculars, who answered when it called their name, who opened the door or signaled the light, became a bridge, a permanent connection, a thread stretching from the Appalachian ridgeline to wherever that person went. And the thing in the forest holds all those threads and follows them all, simultaneously, patiently, to every apartment and every house and every room where someone lies awake at 2 a.m. with their hand on the curtain, almost pulling it back. I moved last year, different city, different state. Okay, I thought maybe distance would help, that the thread would stretch and thin and eventually break. The first night in the new apartment, I woke up at 2:13 a.m. Not 2, not 2:15, 2:13. The exact minute I broke Rule 4, I lay in the dark and I felt the pull and I did not go to the window. But I noticed something small, something I might have imagined. In the silence of the new apartment, in the new city, in the new state, I heard a sound outside. Very faint, very distant. Almost certainly a car, or the wind, or the building settling, or 100 other normal things. It sounded like a single footstep. I don't go to the window. Every night it gets a little harder to remember why.